My wife said I wasn't welcome at Christmas. Hours later, my son called in shock. Dad, why is your name all over CNBC? My wife delivered the sentence over pasta, not during a fight, not with a raised voice, not with tears, anger, or even hesitation. Just Margot sitting across from me at our own dining room table inside our brownstone on the Upper West Side, calmly twirling linguine around her fork like she was discussing a small change in weekend plans.
Clifton, she said, I think it's best if you don't come to the cottage this Christmas. Mom said you've been so difficult lately, and I just think everyone needs a peaceful holiday. I set down my fork. I looked at her, and I said, okay. That was it. No argument, no pleading, no scene. I just said, okay. Then I poured myself more wine, and we finished dinner like two polite strangers pretending the floor had not just opened beneath the table. Afterward, I went into my office and sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about the 22 years I had just watched dissolve somewhere between the breadbasket and the dessert menu. But here's what Margot did not know when she said that. Here is what her mother, Beverly Hartwell, did not know when she apparently told her daughter I was difficult. And here is what none of the Hartwell family understood when they packed their designer luggage and drove up to that $3 million cottage in the Catskills to spend Christmas without me. At 12:12 in the morning on Christmas Day, my son Ethan called me from that cottage, his voice 2 pitches higher than I had ever heard it. Dad, your name is on the CNBC News app right now. What the hell did you do? Before I tell you what happened at 12:12, I need to tell you who I am. Not the version Margot described to her family, the real one. My name is Clifton Reeve. I am 52 years old. I have worked in private equity for 26 years, and for the last 11 of those years, I have run my own firm out of Midtown Manhattan, Reeve Capital Partners. We manage just under $4 billion in assets across healthcare infrastructure and emerging technology. I built that firm from a 12-person operation in a rented office on Park Avenue South into something that now employs more than 200 people, with offices in New York, Chicago, and Austin. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio. My father worked the assembly line at a GM plant until it closed. After that, he drove a school bus for 20 years. My mother cleaned offices at night and sold Avon products on weekends so I could go to college without debt. I got a scholarship to Ohio State, then an MBA from Wharton through a combination of loans, grinding, and refusing to quit. I moved to New York at 25 with one good suit and a determination to never again watch a plant close and take my father's dignity with it. I tell you this because Margot's family, the Hartwells, had money before they could walk. Beverly Hartwell's father was a real estate developer in Connecticut. The Hartwell name was on a building at their country club before Beverly was even born. When Margot and I got married 22 years ago, I was already doing well, but I was new money, self-made money. And no matter how many zeros I added to my net worth, Beverly Hartwell looked at me the way people look at furniture they did not pick out themselves. Politely tolerant, vaguely inconvenienced. For 22 years, I smiled through it. For 22 years, I flew the family to Tuscany. I paid for Ethan's and Sophie's private schools without a word. I hosted Thanksgiving for 18 people and Christmas parties for 30. I sat through Beverly's comments about how Clifton's people had such an interesting way of doing things, and I never said a word. Because Margot was worth it. At least, that was what I told myself. I need to tell you about the 18 months before that dinner, because that dinner did not come out of nowhere, even though it felt like it did. 18 months before Margot told me not to come to Christmas, a company called Hartwell & Vail filed for emergency restructuring. Hartwell & Vail was Beverly Hartwell's brother's firm. Gordon Hartwell had spent 40 years building a regional commercial real estate operation based out of Stamford, Connecticut, with properties across the tri-state area. Gordon was 68, sharp, stubborn, and experienced. He had managed to sail through 3 market cycles on reputation instincts and personal relationships. But the 4th cycle caught him in a position he could not maneuver out of. Rising interest rates, commercial real estate stress, office vacancies spiking after the pandemic, refinancing pressure everywhere. Gordon needed capital, fast. So, he came to Reeve Capital Partners. I want to be honest about this part because it matters for everything that came later. When Gordon Hartwell walked into my office on a Tuesday in April, I already knew the numbers. My team had done the preliminary analysis before the meeting. Hartwell and Vail had a portfolio of approximately $240 million in commercial properties, mostly suburban office parks and strip center retail in Connecticut, New Jersey, and lower New York State. About 60% of that portfolio was performing. The other 40% was bleeding. The firm needed a capital infusion somewhere between $70 million and $90 million to stabilize, refinance its distressed assets, and buy time to execute an orderly sale of the underperforming properties. Gordon sat across from my desk and talked for an hour. He was charming. He was experienced. He genuinely believed his portfolio had a path forward. And he kept saying a version of the same sentence. "We're family, Clifton. We can work out terms that work for everyone." I listened to everything he said. Then I told him no. Not because I wanted to hurt Gordon. Not because I had anything against him personally. Not because I had forgotten that he was my wife's uncle. I told him no because the analysis was clear. The distressed 40% of his portfolio was not going to recover in the time frame his debt structure allowed for. The suburban office market in Connecticut was not coming back fast enough to save the assets he wanted me to save. What Gordon was asking me to do was pour $90 million of my investors' capital into a situation where the upside was modest and the downside was a complete loss. I am a fiduciary. I manage other people's money. Teachers' pension funds are in my portfolio. Endowments are in my portfolio. Retirement accounts are in my portfolio. I do not have the luxury of investing based on holiday dinner seating arrangements. So I told Gordon I could not do the deal as structured. I told him I could potentially look at a smaller, targeted rescue of the performing 60% if he was willing to sell off the distressed assets quickly and accept terms that protected my investors first. Gordon stood up. He was very polite. He said he would think about it. He never called back. Instead, he called Beverly. And Beverly, I can only assume, had a very long conversation with Margot. I noticed the shift around May. Margot started describing things I had said differently from how I had said them. I would mention that Gordon's situation was complicated, and she would relay that I had been dismissive of her uncle. I would explain my fiduciary responsibility to my investors, and somehow it came back to me as Clifton putting business before family, as always. By July, I was difficult. By October, I was being excluded from Hartwell family events I had attended for 2 decades. A birthday dinner in Greenwich, a fall gathering in Connecticut. Little things at first, then bigger ones. Margot would come home from these events with a particular expression on her face. Closed, resolved. Like she had been briefed. I tried to talk to her about it directly in November. I sat down at that same dining room table and said, "Margot, I need you to understand what happened with your uncle. I need to explain what I actually do for a living and why I could not invest in a deal that would have cost my clients their money." She looked at me like I had started speaking a foreign language. "Gordon almost lost everything, Clifton. He came to you for help and you turned him away. Mom thinks you could have structured something different if you had wanted to." "Beverly doesn't understand how private equity works," I said. "She understands family." And that was the end of that conversation. 3 weeks later, over linguine, I was uninvited from Christmas. If you have ever had your character defined by people who do not understand what you do, if you have ever been called cold or difficult or too focused on money by people who benefit every day from the money you have made, then stay with me. Because what happened next was not what any of us expected. And before I go on, I want to ask you to subscribe to this channel, like this video, and leave a comment below telling me about a time someone misread your intentions so completely that you did not even know where to start explaining yourself. Because that comment section is about to be very full. Subscribe, like, and comment. I read every single one. Now, let's go back to Christmas Eve. I spent Christmas Eve alone in a way I had not been alone in 22 years. Our brownstone on West 83rd Street is 4 stories. Margot and I bought it in 2009 when the market was soft, and we spent 3 years renovating it. There's a library on the 2nd floor that I built specifically for the books I have been collecting since graduate school. Dark walnut shelves, a leather reading chair I ordered from a craftsman in Vermont,
a fireplace that actually draws properly. On any other Christmas Eve, that room would have been loud. Sophie and Ethan would have been arguing about which movie to watch. Beverly Hartwell would have been holding a glass of something expensive and looking at my bookshelves like they were arranged incorrectly. But on this Christmas Eve, it was just me and the fireplace. Margot had driven up to the Hartwell cottage in Woodstock, New York the day before. The cottage was a 4-bedroom cedar and glass house Beverly's family had owned for 30 years, perched above a frozen reservoir, with views that Architectural Digest had once photographed. Ethan had driven up separately from Boston, where he was finishing his second year at Harvard Law. Sophie had taken the train from Philadelphia, where she was doing her residency in pediatric medicine at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I had packed their gifts myself. I had wrapped them. I had left them in the front hallway with a note. Then I sat in the library and read. I ate leftover Chinese food. I opened a 2015 Barolo I had been saving for something, poured 2 glasses, and drank both of them. I fed our dog, a 12-year-old golden retriever named Prospect, who had no opinion about family dynamics and kept his head in my lap all evening. I was asleep by 11. The phone rang at 12:12 a.m. I know the exact time because I had set my phone on the nightstand face up, and when it lit up with Ethan's name, the numbers were the first thing I saw. I answered on the second ring. Dad. Something in his voice woke me up faster than the ring had. What's wrong? I asked. Is everyone okay? Everyone's fine. Physically fine. But Dad, your name is on the CNBC News app right now. I got an alert. It says... He paused. I could hear him breathing. Behind him, I could hear the cottage. Low voices. People who had been woken up. Confusion moving through rooms I was not allowed to be in. It says Reeve Capital Partners has submitted a competing bid for the controlling interest in Hartwell and Vale. Dad, what did you do? I sat up in bed. Prospect lifted his head, and I said very carefully, Ethan, I need you to read me the exact headline. He read it. I closed my eyes. Then I said something I had not planned to say, something that came out of 22 years of being called difficult and 18 months of being quietly erased from a family I had loved, supported, and shown up for completely. Ethan, I said, wake your mother up. Tell her I would like to speak with her. And tell her to check what date Gordon filed those restructuring papers. Tell her to check what creditor is listed as the primary secured party on the Hartwell and Vale portfolio as of 3 days ago. Silence on the line. Dad, are you serious right now? Merry Christmas, son. Here is what Margot did not know. Here is what Beverly Hartwell did not know. And here is what Gordon Hartwell, in all his 40 years of doing deals, should have known but did not. Because he had spent those 40 years being the Hartwell name in the room and assuming that was sufficient. When Gordon came to me in April and I told him I could not invest in his distressed portfolio, I meant it. I could not pour my investors' capital into a bad deal just because his sister was my mother-in-law. But I did not stop thinking about Hartwell and Vale, because the performing 60% of his portfolio was genuinely valuable. The well-located properties, the stabilized assets, the buildings and markets that were actually recovering. Those assets had value, not at the price Gordon wanted, and not wrapped around the dead weight of the distressed assets. But separated, cleaned up, and properly recapitalized, there was a real business there. So I had my team spend 3 months building a model, quietly, without involving Gordon, because Gordon had made it clear he was not interested in any partial solution. What we identified was this. If the distressed assets were sold or handed back to the secured lenders, which was increasingly likely given the direction of the restructuring, and if a buyer came in for the performing portfolio at the right basis, you could assemble something worth significantly more than the sum of its parts. With the right management team, the right capital structure, and a 3 to 5 year hold, there was a disciplined investment case. I spent the fall building that case. I did not tell Margot because, frankly, by October, Margot had stopped asking me about my work. And I did not tell anyone in the Hartwell family because this was not a family transaction. This was a business analysis with a potential investment thesis. 3 days before Christmas, my team submitted a bid, a substantial bid. And we submitted it through proper channels to the court-supervised restructuring process Gordon's own advisors had set in motion. It was a bid to acquire the performing assets of Hartwell and Vail at a price that would allow Gordon's secured creditors to be paid in full and potentially leave Gordon himself with some equity value, far more than he would have recovered in a straight liquidation. We were not trying to take Gordon's company. We were trying to be the only buyer disciplined enough to make it worth something. But CNBC does not write 3-paragraph explanations at midnight on Christmas Eve. CNBC writes headlines. And the headline was, Reeve Capital Partners submits competing bid for struggling Connecticut real estate firm founded by wife's family. My phone rang 11 times in the next hour. Margot first, then Beverly, then a number I did not recognize which turned out to be Gordon's attorney, then Ethan again. Then Sophie, who had clearly been woken up by the noise and was trying to understand what was happening. I answered Margot's second call. She was not calm. Clifton, what have you done? Gordon is devastated. Mom is beside herself. Do you understand what this looks like? Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? Margot, on Christmas? You submitted a bid on my uncle's company? On Christmas Eve? After everything that family has been through? Margot. What? I took a breath. Gordon's primary secured lender was going to take those performing assets in a credit bid in January. That lender is a bank. It does not care about Gordon, his family, or the 73 employees at Hartwell and Vail who still have jobs. They were going to acquire those assets, reposition them, and sell them to a REIT by the end of Q2. Gordon would have walked away with nothing. Silence. Our bid changes that, I said. If the court accepts our offer, Gordon's creditors are made whole, and Gordon retains a minority equity stake in the reorganized entity. He is not wiped out. He has something to work with. More silence. I have been building this since April, Margot. Since the day Gordon came to my office. I could not do what he asked me to do then. But I could do this. I heard her breathing. Why didn't you tell me? You told me 2 weeks ago that I put business before family. You told me last month that I should have just helped Gordon because we're family. I stopped trying to explain the difference between what I do and what you think I do sometime around October, Margot. You stopped listening sometime before that. The line was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I need to talk to Mom. I know you do. Merry Christmas, I said. I want to pause here because this is the part of the story I think about the most. Not the bid, not the CNBC headline, not even the phone call at 12:12. I think about the dinner. I think about Margot sitting across from me saying those words. It's best if you don't come. And I think about the complete certainty on her face. The way she had absorbed her mother's framing so completely that I had become in her mind the difficult one, the problem. The person whose absence would give the family a peaceful holiday. I think about myself sitting there saying, okay, and pouring more wine. I have asked myself 100 times why I did not fight harder in that moment, why I did not lay out the whole picture, the business analysis, the 3 months of quiet work, the real meaning of what I had done and what I had not done with Gordon's request. And the honest answer is this. I did not think she would hear it. After 22 years, I had learned the architecture of Margot's family. I knew that Beverly Hartwell's interpretations traveled faster and stuck deeper than anything I could say. I knew that in the Hartwell family framework, I was always going to be the outsider who did not understand how we do things. I had tried to explain myself so many times in so many small moments that I had simply run out of the kind of hope that makes explanation feel worthwhile. So I let her go to Christmas without me. I sat with the fireplace, the old dog, and the good wine, and I waited for the world to catch up to the truth. The days between Christmas and New Year's were unlike anything in my adult life. The CNBC story was picked up by the Wall Street Journal's real estate desk by the morning of December 26th. The journal's framing was different. Reeve Capital Partners offers restructuring lifeline to family-linked Connecticut firm. And that framing changed the conversation considerably.
Gordon's attorney called me on the 27th. Not Beverly's attorney. Not Gordon's family. Gordon himself called me on the 28th. That call lasted 40 minutes. He started defensive. He had been briefed on the bid terms by his restructuring advisors, and he understood intellectually what we were offering. But Gordon Hartwell was 68 years old. He had spent his whole life being the one who structured deals for other people, and being on the receiving end of one was something his pride was working hard against. I let him talk. I did not point out that he had spent 8 months letting Beverly poison my marriage. I did not point out that he had allowed his sister to blame me for his own business failures. I did not mention Christmas dinner or the cottage or being called difficult. None of that was relevant to the conversation we needed to have. I said, Gordon, I looked at your portfolio for 3 months. The performing assets are genuinely good real estate. Your problem was never the quality of those properties. It was the leverage on the distress side dragging everything down. He said nothing. If you work with us, I continued, we get the creditors paid, you keep a stake in something that has real upside over the next 5 years, and your employees keep their jobs. If you fight us, the bank forecloses in January and you get nothing. A long pause followed. Then finally, Gordon said, Why? Why what? Why would you do this for me? After I walked out of your office, because it is a good investment for my clients, I said. That's it, Gordon. That's all it ever was. Business. Another long pause. Then he said, Beverly told Margot you were trying to humiliate the family. I know she did. She was wrong. I know that too. He went quiet for a moment. I could hear him thinking the way you can hear someone reorganizing something heavy in a room. My restructuring advisors say your bid is the best offer we are going to see. I believe that is correct. I'm sorry, he said. I'm going to recommend the court accept it. Good, I said. I think you'll be glad you did. He paused one more time before hanging up. Clifton, I owe you an apology for letting Beverly. He stopped. Then he started again. I should have called you back in April. Yes, I said. You should have. Margot came home on December 30th. She walked into the library where I was sitting with Prospect and a cup of coffee. She sat down in the chair across from me, and for almost a full minute, she did not say anything. Then she said, Gordon told me what the bid terms are. I'm glad he talked to you. He said you spent 3 months building this. My team did, yes. While Mom was telling me you were difficult, while I was... She stopped. Her jaw tightened. While I was telling you not to come to Christmas. I looked at her. I had loved this woman for 25 years. I had built a life with her, raised 2 extraordinary children with her, and sat through more Beverly Hartwell dinners than any human being should ever be asked to endure, because she was worth all of it. And sitting there, looking at her face, seeing the way she was holding something that looked like shame and grief and a kind of fury at herself, I did not feel the satisfaction I thought I might feel. I just felt tired. I need to ask you something, she said. Okay? When I said what I said at dinner, when I told you not to come, she pressed her lips together. What did you think I thought about it? I gave her the real answer, not the polished one. I thought your mother had been talking to you for so long and so consistently that you would stop being able to hear me at all. And I did not know how to fix that, so I stopped trying and started doing the only thing I actually know how to do, which is work the problem in front of me. She looked at the fireplace for a long time. Then she said quietly, I let her do that. I let her frame everything. Every conversation about Gordon, every explanation you tried to give me, I filtered it all through what she had already decided about you. And She stopped. That is not the kind of wife I thought I was. No, I said, it's not. The silence between us was not comfortable, but it was not hostile either. It was the silence of 2 people who had been talking past each other for so long that just sitting in the same room and admitting it felt like progress. What do we do now? She asked. I don't know, I said honestly, but I think it starts with you understanding that when I say no to a bad deal, I am not being cold. I am protecting people who trusted me with their money.
And it ends with your mother understanding that she does not get to define who I am to my own wife.
Margot looked at me for a long moment. She is going to have a very hard time with this. I know, I said. I have watched her have a hard time with me for 22 years. I'm used to it. For the first time since any of this had started, she laughed. It was small and complicated and not entirely happy, but it was real. You spent Christmas alone on purpose, she said. I spent Christmas waiting. For the CNBC alert. For the truth to catch up. The Hartwell and Vail acquisition closed in March. The performing portfolio was reorganized under a new holding structure, with Reeve Capital Partners as the majority investor and Gordon retaining a 22% stake. On the day of closing, it was appraised at $160 million, significantly more than the distressed firm's restructuring valuation. Gordon's secured creditors were paid in full. The 73 employees kept their jobs. Gordon himself, for the first time in 2 years, had a clean balance sheet and a viable business. He called me the day after closing. Beverly wants to apologize to you, he said. Tell Beverly I appreciate that, I said. She wants to do it in person, at the cottage, maybe in the summer. I paused for a moment. I thought about the cottage, the frozen reservoir, the cedar and glass walls, the room where Beverly Hartwell would sit with her expensive wine and look at things as if they had been arranged incorrectly. Tell Beverly I'll think about it, I said, and I left it there. Here is what I know now that I did not know the night Margot told me not to come to Christmas. Being excluded is not the same as being wrong. Being called difficult is not the same as being difficult. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in a moment when everything is being taken from you, your place at the table, your reputation inside your own family, even the basic right to be understood by the person you married, is to stop explaining yourself and start doing the work that will eventually speak for itself. I spent 22 years trying to be legible to a family that had already decided who I was, trying to translate myself into terms Beverly Hartwell could accept, trying to prove year after year that the man from Dayton who put himself through business school was worthy of the space he had earned. Then I sat alone on Christmas Eve with my dog, my books, and my fireplace, and I let go of all of it. Not because I stopped caring, but because I finally understood that the only way to answer a lie about your character is to be so clearly and undeniably yourself that the lie simply cannot survive. Gordon Hartwell's company is worth something because I did my job. My investors made money because I made a hard call in April and a disciplined one in December. 73 people went back to work after New Year's because I spent 3 months building a model no one knew I was building. Difficult does not cover it, but then again, it never did. Margot and I are still married. I want to be honest about that, not because it makes the story cleaner or more satisfying, but because the truth is that 2 people can have a serious failure of trust and still choose to try. We are in therapy. We are working through what it means that she allowed her mother's framing to replace her own judgment for the better part of 2 years. That is not a small thing to work through. Some days, it is hard. Some days, I look at her across our dining room table, and I remember the linguine, and the voice, and the words, I think it's best. And I have to choose actively to keep sitting there. But I keep sitting there, because she is worth it. She always was. She just forgot it for a while. And so did I. It took a CNBC alert at 12:12 in the morning on Christmas Day for both of us to remember. Ethan called me on New Year's Eve. Dad, he said, I just want to say, when you told me to tell Mom to check the restructuring papers, in the moment I was angry. I thought you had done something to embarrass us. I know. I was wrong. I know that too. He laughed. And he sounds like me when he laughs. This kid who grew up watching me work 18-hour days, build something from nothing, and sit through every Beverly Hartwell dinner without flinching. Grandma Beverly is going to have to think very hard about how she talks about you, he said. She doesn't have to do anything, I said. Beverly is going to be Beverly. That part is not going to change. But you're still going to the cottage this summer. I thought about it. I thought about the fireplace in the library. I thought about Prospect with his head in my lap. I thought about the Barolo I had drunk alone and the 12 hours of silence before the phone rang.
Yeah, I said, I'm going to the cottage. Good, Ethan said. And it was. My name is Clifton Reeve. I am 52 years old. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, the son of a factory worker and an Avon saleswoman. I have spent my adult life doing one thing: taking complicated, difficult situations that other people have given up on and finding the path through them. I am not difficult. I am precise. There is a difference. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes the only way to make that difference visible is to sit in the quiet and wait for Christmas morning.